Thank you for joining me for this presentation about 4 historic women's clubs of Peters Township. I'm Nancy Martin, the library archivist. I think you'll be amazed to learn all that women have contributed to the development of the township. I know I was. The 4 organizations I've chosen to highlight are the Peters Township Society of Farm Women, the Women's Club of Peters Township, the McMurray Century Club, and the Stratford Manor Garden Club. The reason I've selected these 4 organizations is because all of them have donated records to the archives and because none of them still exists. I wanted this to be an historical, not a promotional presentation. The Peters Township Society of Farm Women was established in 1918 as part of the Pennsylvania Society of Farm Women. Here's a photograph of the society's members from the early 1930s. The Archive's weekly volunteer, Chris, has done an amazing job identifying as many of these women as possible. A digital copy of this photograph with names can be found online at Pennsylvania Photos and Documents. Chris and I have also been working to give the women back their names. I'm sure you're familiar with the tradition of women being referred to by their husbands' names. For example, here you see Mrs. Loyal Cheeseman. Mrs. Loyal Cheeseman was actually born Edmonia Flora Riggs, who later married Loyal Cheeseman. By referring to her as Edmonia Flora Cheeseman, née Riggs, we're hoping to make her more findable by researchers. Chris has done an amazing amount of research to make all of this possible. Again, a huge thank you to her. The Society of Farm Women was established in Somerset County in 1914 by Flora Black and a dozen of her neighbors. It was initially known as Die Hausfrauen, meaning housewives in German. Many of the founding members had German backgrounds. Flora Black established the society to provide an opportunity for farm women to get together once a month to socialize and learn. The organization's name was changed in 1917 to the Society of Farm Women because of anti-German sentiment caused by World War I. It's interesting to note that Pennsylvania is the only state to have had a Society of Farm Women. The Peters Township Society of Farm Women appears to have disbanded at the end of 1978 after celebrating its 60th anniversary in October with a turkey dinner at Center Presbyterian Church. The timing makes sense as fewer and fewer local women were living on farms in Peters Township in the late 1970s. The Society of Farm Women of Pennsylvania still exists, dedicated to promoting an appreciation of rural life. It simply doesn't have a Peters Township chapter. The records of the Society of Farm Women held by the Library Archives are described as MS 2023-043. The archives has the Society's minutes from 1918 to 1966 and 3 of its scrapbooks dating from 1918 to 1959. The scrapbooks have all been digitized and are now available online through Pennsylvania Photos and Documents. The Society's yearbooks from 1919 until 1969 can be found in the archives in the Hutchison family papers. Here's a photograph of the cover of the first yearbook created by the farm women of Peters Township in 1919. According to Article 2 of the Society's Constitution, the object of this organization shall be to cherish and perpetuate farm and country life by teaching the dignity and science of farming and the charm of a real country home, and to create and maintain a center of social intercourse and exchange of thought by farm women for the promotion of their mutual interests. One detail I love about the early society yearbooks is that they included the name of the farm on which each woman lived. Miss Ora Bell Bryant, for example, lived on Fairlawn, and Emma McMurray Johnston on Clearview. Here are some images of the annual yearbook from the Society's 50th anniversary year in 1968. The Society's flower was the hollyhock. Its motto was "For Happiness." Its objective was "For the betterment of the community," and its colors, somewhat depressingly, were brown and tan. Monthly meetings were held on the third Thursday of each month at 1 p.m. sharp. I love the sharp. Each yearbook contained a list of society officers and committees, which, as you can see at the top of the second page, included the scrapbook committee. Thank goodness for that committee. Without it and the scrapbooks it created, we would know so much less about the society and its activities than we do. Each monthly meeting had a theme. In September of 1968, it was citizenship. There were prayers at the meeting, a salute to the flag, roll call, recitations and readings, music, and sometimes an outside speaker. The members took turns hosting at their houses. The month's hostess is listed towards the bottom of the page. Lunch was served at 12 p.m., just prior to the 1 p.m. meeting. Merry Christmas was the theme of the Farm Women's Luncheon meeting in December of 1967. When a member's name was called during roll call, the members were to respond with the name of a Christmas carol rather than with their own name. A recitation, group carol singing, and a gift exchange took place at this particular meeting. About the roll call. This tradition of answering the reading of your name with something other than your actual name appears to date back to the society's beginnings. According to the 1919 yearbook, the monthly roll calls were to be answered by quotations from Lincoln. There must have been some advanced preparation involved for that response. The names of native trees, the names of townships, the names of birds, and my personal favorite, the names of dry states. At the back of each yearbook is a list of the Society's charter members. You can see in the 1968 yearbook here that all but one of them, Mrs. Gilmore Bickerton Swagler, were deceased. In terms of its accomplishments, the Peters Township Society of Farm Women was an award winner. The women took home the blue ribbon for their booth at the 1925 Washington County Fair. Here is a beautiful picture of their booth filled with quilts, jams and preserves, needlework, fresh vegetables, and handmade rugs. And here is a photo of the actual blue ribbon the Society received for its 1925 fair booth. As I mentioned, the Archives is lucky enough to have 3 scrapbooks from the Society of Farm Women that were donated by the Trax family. Edna Trax was a member of the group, and it was at her former home that the scrapbooks were found. And the photo booth and the ribbon are both contained in the first of the 3 scrapbooks. And here is a 1922 newspaper article about the farm women's participation in the Washington County Fair, also found in the same scrapbook. Notice that the women aren't referred to as farm women, but as farmers' wives. Moving on to the second women's club I want to discuss, the Women's Club of Peters Township. The Women's Club of Peters Township actually started out as the Junior Society of Farm Women of Peters Township, the daughters of the farm women I just finished talking about. The first meeting of the Junior Society was held at Anna Froby's house on December 3rd, 1921. 19 young women attended, 12 of whom were school teachers, which led the women to select Saturday afternoons for their monthly meetings. Annual dues were $1. Here we have a photograph of the Junior Society of Farm Women of Peters Township, taken around 1925. Leroy Zimmerman, who can be seen sitting in the front row shading his eyes, was born in 1921, and I estimate him to be about 4 or 5 years old here in this picture. A history of the Women's Club of Peters Township can be found on page 47 of the oral history interview with Elma Johnston that took place in August of 2003. The oral histories are available for checkout from the library. Elma was a member of the Women's Club from 1959 until the mid-1990s. The club had a musical group that sang at seniors' homes, a drama club that performed skits, a garden department, and a book club. My favorite quote from Elma's interview is her assertion that the club was, quote, not frivolous. Here's a newspaper photograph of one of the club's comedic skits that is mentioned by Elma in her interview. The theme of this particular skit was standing room only on this bus. Here's another newspaper photograph of the Women's Club choral group, also described by Elma in her interview. Elma is third from the right. And we also have a photograph of some members of the choral group. Elma is the shortest member. According to the history of the Women's Club of Peters Township that appears in Elma's oral history transcript, in 1928, the name of the club was changed to the Saturday Afternoon Club because members who had attended the General Convention of Women's Club that year reported that the other junior clubs were comprised of teenagers And you'll remember that the Junior Society chose to hold their monthly meetings on Saturday afternoons, hence the change to the Saturday Afternoon Club. In 1930, the group renamed itself the Society of Farm Women Auxiliary. In 1950, a book club and a garden department were organized by the club. For many years, this was the only garden club in Peters Township. In 1951, a junior women's club was formed, which later split off to become the Century Club, which I'll talk about next. And if you think about it, that makes perfect sense. The young women who started the Junior Society of Farm Women in 1921 would be middle aged 30 years later. The younger members wanted their own club. In 1952, the Society of Farm Women Auxiliary officially changed its name to the Women's Club of Peters Township. It had a membership of 74 at the time. The records of the Women's Club of Peters Township held by the Library Archives are described as MS 2023 077. As you can see listed here, the archives has membership and financial records, guest books, and scrapbooks dating from the 1950s until the 1980s. This is a picture of the 1957-58 Women's Club of Peters Township annual yearbook that it created in the style of the Peters Township Society of Farm Women. In terms of the contributions of the club to the community, in the 1920s, the club sewed for the Kennisburg Hospital, the Red Cross, and the Veterans Hospital, and made layettes for newborns. It also planted trees at Vinicius School. From 1933 until 1943, it sponsored a community fair that was later taken over by the Protective Association. In the 1950s, the club held bazaars to benefit children with disabilities and cerebral palsy clinics. The club accepted requests for funds from residents. In the 1960s, the club collected clothes for children in need, addressed campaign envelopes for the Easter Seal Society, and contributed homemade pies to the Firemen's Fair. In the 1970s, the club worked to improve and maintain the Veterans Memorial on East McMurray Road and contributed to the Firemen's Fund drive for a new fire hall in Peters Township. Beginning in the 1970s, the club granted a scholarship to a senior Peters Township High School student studying special education, music, library science, or nursing. In 1957 and 1958, the Women's Club met on the fourth Tuesday evening of the month at 8 p.m. in the Peters Township Grade School cafeteria. The Women's Club of Peters Township was a blue ribbon winner, just like the Society of Farm Women. The club won first prize at the 1954 Township Fair for its display table, which can be seen in the picture on the right. I'm sorry, the picture of the prize-winning table isn't of prize-winning quality. I may be biased, but I'm going to argue that the club's most significant contribution to Peters Township was the establishment of the library. Apparently, the first mention of establishing a community library appears in the club's minutes from a meeting held on November 27, 1955. In January of 1956, the club adopted a recommendation from the executive board that the club undertake the establishment of a community library. To that end, the first township library opened in the basement of the old Peters Township High School that was here on East McMurray Road in October of 1957. It was open only 6 hours a week. This newspaper article can be found in the 1954 to 1961 scrapbook of the Women's Club. Here we have a photograph of the executive board members of the 1960 Women's Club of Peters Township. From left, we have Mrs. Patterson, treasurer, Mrs. Moore, VP, Alberta Liebarger, president, Mrs. Vaubel, recording secretary, and Mrs. Larson, corresponding secretary. The club hosted a bazaar and card party in the Peters Township High School cafeteria to benefit the library on Friday, April 30th, 1965. Here are a ticket and a photograph of the event found in the club's 1964 to 1974 scrapbook. Here we have a photograph of Alberta Liebarger standing and Barbara Miner, who is seated. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but if you enter the library by the side entrance, you will find framed photographs of both Alberta and Barbara hanging on the wall outside of the main floor multipurpose room. The two women were instrumental in the establishment and growth of the Peters Township Library. Both were members of the Women's Club of Peters Township. This photograph was taken at the opening of the library in its new location on the second floor of the Peters Township Municipal Building, now the Township offices, in 1965. And here's an invitation to that 1965 open house at the library's new location and a newspaper photograph of the new building in which it is described as, quote, clean cut and much needed. Here's a program from the 1965 open house. It mentions that the library is staffed by volunteers, that the library's holdings are 4,834 volumes, and that the capacity of the new library space is 8,500 volumes, so it had lots of room to grow. Circulation was 9,000 books per year. To put those numbers in context, in 2023, the library's holdings totaled 107,000 items, and it circulated about 250,000 items annually. An article from page 2 of the Daily Notes newspaper out of Canonsburg on Friday, October 14th, 1966, reported that the Women's Club had voted to present the contents, including all furnishings, books, and other documents of the Peters Township Library, to the township. The article reported that this transfer, or gift as they termed it, had been the intention of the club since the library's creation, but that it had waited until the library was established enough and large enough to warrant township tax support to ensure its continuance. In the second half of the article, the club affirms its continued support of the library, and that article ends with the statement that the majority of the library board members will continue to come from the Women's Club. I wasn't able to discover exactly when the Women's Club disbanded. The last reference I could find to it was in a February 22nd, 1996 edition of the Observer Reporter, which advertises a benefit spaghetti dinner whose proceeds were going in support of, you guessed it, the library. The third club I'd like to discuss is the McMurray Century Club. It began as the Peters Township Junior Women's Club and was first established in 1951. It assumed its new name in April of 1956. This is a photograph of the executive officers of the club for 1957. According to a newspaper article in the Observer Reporter, the club disbanded in 1991, so it had a long 40-year run. As of today, the only records the archives has that were created by the McMurray Century Club is a single scrapbook from 1957 to 1958. And I have to say that it is one of the most beautifully designed scrapbooks I have ever seen. Each month in the scrapbook begins with these striking hand-painted title pages. It's not surprising that the scrapbook earned the Century Club a blue ribbon for first prize in logbook or scrapbook 1957 to 1958 from the Washington County Federation of Women's Club. Note the hand-painted detail above the ribbon on this page of the scrapbook. Here's my favorite page with its hand-painted peacock. And what was all this pride in reference to? The reason that the Century Club was so proud was because its member and past president, Jane Shaner, earned the title of Mrs. Canonsburg and was a finalist for Mrs. Pennsylvania in 1958. Jane was a former home economics teacher turned stay-at-home mother of two who lived on Valley Brook Road with her husband Douglas, an art teacher at Mount Lebanon High School. Sadly, Jane did not win Mrs. Pennsylvania. She was runner-up to Mrs. Virginia Carlson, who was Mrs. Wilkinsburg. Unlike the Society of Farm Women and the Women's Club of Peters Township, the McMurray Century Club appears not to have published annual yearbooks. The club did, however, publish monthly newsletters in the 1950s called the Peters Piper. Here's a copy of the front page of the November 1958 volume of the newsletter. It includes information about the club's upcoming December bazaar, meetings, committee reports, information on past events, state federation news, board news, and proposed amendments to the club's bylaws. According to the contents of the 1957-58 Century Club scrapbook, the club had an extremely busy 2 years. In 1957, it hosted a Roaring Twenties party at Buffalo Inn in South Park. That's what the photographs you see here are promoting. It also organized fashion shows and bazaars. Its members participated in a door to door donation drive entitled March Against Polio, and in February of 1958, the club organized a sweetheart dance at Mount Lebanon Country Club, later known as Rolling Hills Country Club. The largest fundraiser of the club was the annual Century Capers Show that ran from 1966 to 1977. The Capers was a musical revue performed over multiple nights each spring at Peters Township High School. Each year, the Century Club hired the Broadway firm Jerome Cargill Incorporated, which provided a director and costumes for the show. The cast was comprised entirely of members of the community who volunteered to perform. A kickoff party for each year's show was held at Lou Carey's restaurant. The director would be in town for 3 weeks to stage and rehearse the production. On the left is a photograph from the March 19th, 1968 edition of the Pittsburgh Press promoting Century Capers 68, in which more than 200 McMurray area residents participated. On the right is a Post-Gazette photograph from the April 15th edition of performers from Century Capers 70, which was a calendar review. On the left is Mrs. Black representing New Year's. On the right is Mrs. Myers representing St. Patrick's Day. The show raised funds for a proposed youth recreation center and for scholarships for area students. In addition to themed parties and Century Capers, the club also hosted a youth summer camp in the summer of 1957. Here we have a copy of the registration form and a photograph taken at the camp. Also in the late 1950s, the club's youth committee, in cooperation with the Peters Township School District, offered 8 classes to 7th and 8th grade Peters Township students on social graces. The course was entitled How Not to Be a Square. These photos show Mrs. Ruth Wilson instructing the children during the 4-week-long, twice-a-week class. The session themes included dating, let's eat, public appearances, dancing, little things, and may I introduce. Can you imagine kids today taking this class? Here's a newspaper photograph from the scrapbook of students who participated in the skits that were presented in the classes and the school district employees who supported the program. Ruth Wilson can be seen in the back row, third from the right. The cringiest thing I found in the scrapbook was a do's and don'ts for girls from the 1958 Don't Be a Square classes. The advice is 67 years old and it is showing its age. The advice includes, don't be possessive. No boy likes to look as though he were all tied up in a neat little package with your name on it. And do read the newspaper headlines and listen to sports and news reports enough to discuss with some intelligence what's going on in the world. Do be a real friend. Make a boy feel you like him, not just his convertible. The list was not without some humor. One piece of advice was, do display a sincere interest and pride in his achievements. This may be an effort when his theme song is Carburetors, but it is an effort that pays dividends. Interestingly, there was no do's and don'ts list for boys. The final Peters Township Women's Club I want to highlight is the Stratford Manor Garden Club. The club was established in 1980 and federated in 1981. Here's a 1983 picture of the club members who participated in the Peters Township Spring Cleanup. According to its original bylaws, the object of the Stratford Manor Garden Club was to stimulate and encourage interest in all phases of home gardening and to promote better horticultural practices, civic beauty, and the conservation of natural resources. Membership was limited to 50 active members and annual dues were $5. In 1983, the bylaws were amended to allow for 60 active members and dues were raised to $10. Only 5 of the active members could be from outside the Stratford Manor plan. The club met on the third Friday of the month, September through May. Its standing committees included program, membership, ways and means, hospitality, publicity, civic and conservation, yearbook and awards, newsletter, field trips, and babysitting, whose chair was responsible for making babysitting arrangements for general meetings and other events as required. Do you know of any men's organizations with such a committee? Neither do I. Does everyone know where Stratford Manor is in Peters Township? It's a residential plan of houses built in the 1970s and 1980s off of Oakwood Drive that backs onto Chartiers Creek, not far from the intersection of Route 19 and McMurray Road. Here's a photograph of the wall and garden at the entrance to the plan. As you can see from this list, the archives has far more records from the Stratford Manor Garden Club than we do from the McMurray Century Club. Just like the Peters Township Society of Farm Women, the Women's Club of Peters Township, and the McMurray Century Club, the Stratford Manor Garden Club created scrapbooks. The look of the scrapbooks changed in the 80 years between 1918 and 1998. Magnetic albums replaced plain paper scrapbooks, but the format in which the women recorded their activities did not. These scrapbooks provide a wealth of information about club members and their activities. The archives is so grateful to have them all. So on the left here, you can see a page from the Society of Farm Women's 1918 scrapbook. And on the right, a page from the Stratford Manor Garden Club scrapbook from 1998. Even the style of the scrapbook pages didn't change that much. Both the page from the Society of Farm Women's 1957 scrapbook on the left and the Garden Club's 1991 scrapbook on the right include decorative elements appropriate to the season and clippings from the club's yearbook describing the theme of each month's meetings. They really weren't so different. The Stratford Manor Garden Club also produced annual yearbooks. Here's a copy of the cover and a couple of pages from the club's 1986 to 1987 yearbook. At the September meeting, Ed Woods from the Washington County Agricultural Cooperative presented about how to plant bulbs and take care of outdoor plants. At the October meeting, Kathy Deschter offered a time management program for the quote, slightly disorganized. Here are photographs from one of the Garden Club scrapbooks with photos of the club's first officers from 1980. Rosemary Mitchell was president, Gwen Spencer was VP, Joanne Karpman was secretary, and Peggy Saunders was treasurer. Like the other women's clubs we've discussed, the Stratford Manor Garden Club was very active in the community. The club hosted a booth at the Crossroads Nationality Food Fair in July of 1981. The booth was located in front of Capera's Casuals and Boutique store, and the club sold, quote, pepperoni pizza in a bun, which I can only assume is what we would now refer to as pepperoni rolls. They were sold for $1 each. The club also planted the gardens at the Peters Township Library in 1981. These are photographs that were taken by the club that summer. The club also ran a Sunflower Fun Flower contest at the library for a number of years in the 1980s. The contest was open to children ages 6 to 14 who could stop by the library and pick up a sunflower seedling in June. When the sunflowers reached their full height, the children were instructed to have their picture taken with the sunflower and turn in their photo to the library. The club gave awards for the tallest plant and for the largest seed head. According to the October 22, 1981 edition of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Karen Manley won for the tallest sunflower of 9 feet 6.5 inches, and Steve Gennaro for the largest seed head with a diameter of 13 inches. A picture display of the winners was posted in the library's children's department. Not only did the Stratford Manor Garden Club beautify and host programs at the library, it also donated money to it. Here we have both a newspaper article and a photograph of Club President Linda Maurer presenting a check for $200 to Library Director Pierre Lee in 1987. The library was not the only beneficiary of the Garden Club's fundraising efforts. It also donated to Meals on Wheels, the fire department, the ambulance service, the food bank, and the Chamber of Commerce Community Room. The article also mentions that the club offered a $350 scholarship for a Peters Township senior pursuing studies related to the environment. The Garden Club's largest annual fundraiser was its fall fashion show. Here's the cover of the 1987 fashion show program. I'm going to warn you, just as the do's and don'ts for girls didn't stand the test of time, neither did the 1980s fashions that were modeled at these shows. I did warn you, and I apologize to the women in the photographs for viewing their 1980s fashion through the lens of 2025. The Stratford Manor Garden Club also organized various field trips for its members, planted flowers at the entrance to the Stratford Manor Plan each spring, participated in the township's cleanup day, held an annual installation luncheon for new officers, and an annual Christmas party for its members. Here we have a photograph of members of the club engaged in tree planting in 1982 and a presentation on microwave ovens held at the club's October 1984 meeting. I think we can all agree that the women's clubs of Peters Township contributed a great deal to the community. The clubs improved the quality of life in the township through their social and service programs. Without these women, we wouldn't be here tonight having this presentation because there wouldn't be a Peters Township library to host it in. So I'd like to end this presentation by thanking the women of the Peters Township Society of Farm Women, the Women's Club of Peters Township, the McMurray Century Club, the Stratford Manor Garden Club, and all other Peters Township women's clubs, past and present, for all of their contributions to the township. Thank you again for joining me to celebrate all that historic women's organizations have done. I hope you all learned something you didn't know before. I know I did. I'll make my usual pitch to please keep the archives in mind when you come across records relating to life in Peters Township in your own home. We'd love for you to donate them to the library archives so we can share them with the community like we did in this presentation. Thank you.